After an injury-plagued 2023 season, the Seahawks are banking on a healthy Abraham Lucas returning to action. What's the latest on his status for the 2024 season? And is there reason to still be concerned? We'll be diving in on a Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, on Blue Friday by my co-host Nick Lee. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're from nearby Lacey, Washington, or across the country in Jacksonville, Florida. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Now that we're in the midst of OTAs, as we do each and every year, it's never too early to start dishing out some 2024 predictions. And we're going to do it over and under style, a Blue Friday game day here on the podcast. We'll also be taking a close look at where things stand at the right tackle position. Plenty of uncertainty there still with Abraham Lucas. And we'll be looking at the rest of the depth chart, where things stand at that position. Without further ado, let's get to it. Now for your lead story here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Going into the 2023 season, one of the biggest reasons for optimism for the Seahawks was the two young tackles that they had that started 16 games together as rookies the season prior, helped the Seahawks get to the playoffs, Charles Cross and Abraham Lucas. Unfortunately, while Cross ended up bouncing back from an injury that cost him 3 games early in the season and started the rest of the year, the same cannot be said for Abraham Lucas, dealing with lingering knee issues throughout the season, limited to just 6 games before landing back on injured reserve a second time at the end of the year. And Nick, we had this discussion a few months ago where it seemed like maybe things were trending in the right direction with Abraham Lucas, and yet this is just my opinion. I guess I'll dish my opinion out after we read the quote here, but this is what Mike Macdonald had to say after the OTA on Wednesday, the open OTA, about Abraham Lucas's status. As far as an update, he said, "It's hard to tell. We're shooting for camp right now. Abe is getting after it in rehab. I'm proud of his effort he's putting in." So it was a pretty short update, not a lot of information provided. And that's maybe the thing that is concerning me at this point. Not just the fact that we're talking about a player that last year Pete Carroll used the dreaded word chronic when talking about his knee issue. And he even said that surgery wasn't going to be something that was going to help it. And yet he had off-season knee surgery. And now here we are, middle of OTAs, and it sounds like they are just holding their breath that he's going to maybe be available at the beginning of training camp. I don't know about you, but this particular statement, as short as it was, and maybe I'm reading too much into this, but I'm looking at some of the other things that are going on, how last season transpired, and this raised some big red flags for me heading toward the 2024 season.
Yeah, I mean, last year, if he was playing college ball, he probably would have had to, or felt like he needed to apply for a medical red shirt. I mean, it was just one of those seasons where he never quite got going, after 16 games as a rookie, where in some ways he outperformed Charles Cross. To 6 games last year, almost a quarter of the amount of snaps. I mean, it was a real bummer of a year. But when I turn it around, the coaches seem pretty non-committal right now about where he's going to be in the next couple months. But when you look at things like the depth chart last year, around this time or so, it was Greg Eland and Stone Forsythe and Jake Curhan that could possibly step in for Abe Lucas. And now this is why you go and get a George Fant. George Fant, I'm probably going to turn this a little bit into a George Fant segment because, of course, I still think the best version of the Seahawks offensive line involves Abe Lucas at right tackle. But, I mean, what a journey for George Fant. Coming back, a savvy move, played 874 snaps at right tackle last year for the Texans. Been basically a starting caliber tackle for the last handful of years. And I was kind of looking around and, what's George Fant kind of been up to since he last was Seattle? And I love that. Just looking back at we're very familiar with kind of his backstory at Western Kentucky, but I just love this little excerpt I found on Wikipedia. It's throughout his first 4 years at Western Kentucky, friends and coaches urged Fant to join Hilltopper football team, but he refused. He received letters from NFL teams that were interested in giving him a spot. He disregarded the letters and even threw them away. And then eventually he was faced with the decision to either play professional basketball in Poland or provide for his family immediately and possibly get a chance to play football. Rest is history. And he's now become one of the better, I think, if I could just, drum up a situation where a realistic, backup tackle or a reserve, swing tackle. George Fant's that guy. I mean, he's carved out a pretty decent career, being a starting tackle, being a reserve. So that is why you go get George Fant, is the Abe Lucas situation. That move alone, Corbin, kind of told me kind of all I need to know about how they feel.
Yeah, when that signing happened back in March, that was something that I actually had a feature on our podcast about, because it did scream the fact that the contract is a 2-year deal worth $9.1 million, could be worth up to $14 million, I believe, with incentives. And that was added in there because if you don't have Abraham Lucas available and George Fant starts the entire season, now you are going to be paying him what he deserves for starting the entire year. And he did have a solid year for the Texans at right tackle last year, helping protect CJ Stroud and getting Houston to the divisional round in the AFC. So George Fant, that signing, it looks ever more important now at this stage. And maybe Abe Lucas will be ready for the start of training camp. We don't know. Maybe Mike Macdonald's just not saying much because he doesn't have to. And that's the truth. He doesn't have to provide much information right now. But the fact is, Uchenna Nwosu, who had a pectoral tear, is out on the practice field right now. And he was not limited at all in OTAs on Wednesday. And that is great news for the Seahawks. And yet here we are with Abe Lucas. And from my understanding, this was not like a major surgery on his knee. It's not like he had a torn ACL or something. This was not supposed to be a surgery that was going to take a super lengthy recovery. And yet here we are now, several months removed from it. And nobody seems to know when he is going to be able to come back and play. And I guess what my concern here is that if this is something like tendonitis that is a recurring issue, or if he's got something like arthritis going on that isn't going to get better, maybe it'll feel better sometimes, but it's going to always be something that can flare up. It just makes you wonder about the longevity of his career. Is this going to be a guy that you can count on to be your starting right tackle? And I think it is worth noting, and you mentioned George Fant, if we are to assume that Abe Lucas is not going to be ready for the start of training camp or even for week 1, you at least now have George Fant, who's got over 2,000 career snaps at right tackle. Your third stringer, Stone Forsythe, started 8 games last year at right tackle. He's got 412 career snaps, still a young guy that's still improving, still growing some. And you drafted Michael Jarrell. He is not going to be ready to play right away, but you added him to the depth chart. They've got an undrafted rookie in Garrett Greenfield, who's getting a lot of looks in OTAs, that was a 3-time All-American at the FCS level. There's depth there. There's some really good depth at that position, mixing young players and veterans. So the Seahawks are in a much better spot than they were last year when Greg Island and Jake Curhan were the main backups going into the season. The Seahawks have really done a good job of improving their depth and getting some experience there with George Fant coming back. So I guess that's the silver lining here. But it doesn't matter if George Fant's playing or any of the other guys playing at right tackle. As good of a career as Fant has had, I still feel like Abe Lucas, if he's right, if he's healthy, that is clearly your best starting right tackle. And so not having him available, that's still going to have negative repercussions, though you're hoping that George Fant is going to be able to negate that quite a bit.
Yeah, like I said, I still think the best version of the 2024 Seahawks offensive line does include Abe Lucas at right tackle. I mean, look at the Pro Football Focus grades last year. It's pretty much thrown out the window. I mean, really like a medical red shirt after a really solid rookie year. Then last year just kind of was lost. And so, I still believe that he could be the guy. The words chronic, those are the kind of words that do make me worried. But George Fant's a heck of a hedge for that. So this is kind of one of those things we're going to not really know a ton more about until they kind of strap it on and start playing for, in training camp later on in the summer. So, just looking at the depth of both lines, really the defensive and offensive lines, you can clearly see this was a concerted effort by the coaching staff to boost the depth.
When we come back, the 2024 season is going to be here before you know it. It's never too early to start predicting how the season is going to play out, both in position groups and with individual players. We're going to play a spirited game of over and under, starting on the defensive side when we come back here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience is what brings home the winning trophy, and it also keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, whether it's superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, steering wheel covers, whatever you need, whether it's speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn the car you have into an MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Blue Friday edition. I'm your host, Corbin Smith, joined for today's show by my co-host, Nick Lee, and a special thanks to all the 12s out there. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. As we love to do on Blue Friday, it's time for game day. We've put all the hay in the barn at the beginning of the week, doing all the research, the study. Now it's time to have some fun. Let's have some games going on here. And it's never too early to start projecting how things are going to play out during the 2024 season for the Seahawks. So as we love to do on this show, it's time to go to one of our standbys, over or under. And we're going to have a topic that's presented with a certain statistic. And most of these, we are going to set it up where there's literally no way you can do an even. It's going to be over or under. So this is going to be a lot of fun. Let's start on the defensive side of the football. And there's a few here that I think we're going to have some in-depth conversations about. But let's start here with our first one, Nick. Let's go to the linebacker position. Over or under 200 combined tackles by Tyrell Dodson and Jerome Baker.
Well, as 100 tackle seasons are becoming more common with that 17th game, and Jerome Baker has averaged 102 tackles in the last 2 or 5 seasons. So he's been fairly consistent there. I could see him, getting in the 120 range, maybe a bit higher than that with the amount of snaps he might play in Seattle. So he'll get his, I think. It's the one I'm worried about is Dodson. He's the wild card. We've kind of been talking about that for a while now, with him being one of the wild cards of the defense. Last year, he had 74 combined tackles, which was a career high by more than double. So he's still climbing that. He hasn't had the right, stage to really get to the 100 plus tackles. Maybe the Seahawks just kind of let him roll, for 16, 17 games if he stays healthy. That's kind of a wild card for me. I also think they like Tyrese Knight. I know that's kind of a bit of a wild card in and of itself. He might be more of a project than starting week 1, racking up some tackles. But I think he might eventually work himself into somewhat of a role. So I'm going to go under here. Again, I've been fairly I'm not as impressed with the linebacker depth and room as I am other parts of the Seahawks team. This is probably one of my least favorites, if not my least favorite position group right now, as far as how I see the depth and quality. So I'm going to go under.
Yeah, with you. I think it's going to be close, assuming that both Dodson and Baker start the entire season. But as you mentioned, I've got some questions about whether or not that's going to be the case. And Tyrese Knight, I can just tell you from the conversations that I've had with people that have links to this organization, they are much higher on Tyrese Knight than a lot of people outside the organization are. I have been impressed. Granted, it's OTAs. There's a lot of things we can't see right now, but I've been impressed by what I've seen from him, rookie minicamp and then OTA on Wednesday. There's a long way to go, but just a number of elements here that I can't go over on this. I think it could be close, but I just 200, that seems a little bit rich. So I'm going to go under. Our next one here, the man of the hour in the Pacific Northwest, over or under 3.5 interceptions by Devin Witherspoon.
I mean, predicting interceptions is always really tricky. There's a bit of luck and randomness to it. And so at some point, he had one last year, mostly due to teams knowing they couldn't attack. They could attack elsewhere. He was one of the stronger parts of the defense last year. I'm going to go under, but not necessarily because I think I'm going to say 3. 3 is a pretty good number. 3 interceptions, because I don't think teams will be quite as comfy throwing elsewhere. That's me counting on a bounce back from Reek Woolen. That's me just, assuming the pass rush is a little better, and, there might be some rush throws. So I could see him getting 3, maybe run 1 back for another touchdown. But this is me saying does he get 3 or 4? 4, it seems a bit steep for me. He absolutely has a talent to do it. It's just a matter of, the volume of opportunities with interceptions is sometimes an issue, but I could easily see him, getting 2 or 3. I'm going to go under, but not because I don't think he can, just some of the randomness, but 3 is a good number.
I'm going over. I'm going way over. I think he gets 6 picks this year.
Ooh, all right.
Here's why I'm making this bold prediction. I just love this defensive scheme for him. Going back and watching more Ravens film with him playing in the slot, he's going to play some on the boundary too, but Mike Macdonald loves him in the slot. You could already see that on the practice field, but he is going to be in the middle of the action all the time. And last year he had 16 pass breakups. That is going to start turning into interceptions as he gets more experience. You got to remember, he didn't play a lot in the slot in college. I think especially when you look at Wednesday's OTA, his closing speed, jumping the ball in coverage is as good as any corner in the NFL right now. So I'm going to go 6. I think this year he's going to explode. And the fact the pass rush is going to be better and Reek Woolen, I think, is going to be better on the other side. You're going to have to pick your poison. I think there's going to be more targets to be made, and I think he's going to take advantage of it. Our next one, speaking of that pass rush, over under 1.5 defenders with double-digit sack totals. So you better go over or under. I don't think we're going to have half a human being playing for the Seahawks.
Mike Macdonald's defense can do weird things. I don't know. So the Seahawks have not had a double-digit sack player since 2018. And that year they had 2. They had Frank Clark and Jaron Reed. So having 2 seems a little optimistic. I think the Seahawks have the personnel to pull that off more so than they've had in the last few years. I would just be happy with 1 because it's been a long time. Well, I mean, we don't need to get too greedy here. Yeah. I'm going to go under. I do think they get 1. I think between, Nwosu and Mafe, make Mafe with that another step forward. Nwosu with a healthy season. He's well on his way, I think, to being in that double-digit sack range. So I'm going to go with 1. 2 would be amazing, of course, but that would be a drastic, one of the bigger developments, I think, for this first year of Mike Macdonald's defense, if he can get 2 Seahawks to get double-digit sacks after that's been a struggle for so long.
Past precedent is telling me to go under because even though Mike Macdonald's teams have been great at racking up sacks, aside from Justin Matabuke last year, I mean, generally it's been a collective effort where a lot of guys are getting 5, 6, 7 sacks, and you're not getting the double-digit guys necessarily. But I'm going to go over, and here's why. I love the interior defensive line from the standpoint that I think having the trio of Jaron Reed, Leonard Williams, and now Byron Murphy II, the amount of pressure that those guys are going to be able to create collapsing the pocket is only going to make life easier for a fully healthy Uchenna Nwosu, a Boye Mafe, who I think still has another big step to make here. And I think another guy that we can't discount here, I'm really high on Draymond Jones playing a lot of snaps at the edge and playing inside on passing downs. He's had 6.5 sacks before in a season. It just feels like he could be a guy that could pop in this scheme. I think, I'm not necessarily going to be predicting that he does it, but I'm going to go over just because I think there's enough guys there that with that interior depth, heck, Jaron Reed's done it before. Byron Murphy II could explode as a rookie. I'm not going to sit here and say he's going to get 10 sacks, but I like that interior rush, and I think it helps the guys the outside. Our next one here, Nick, this will be fun. 2,000 rushing yards allowed, over or under?
Well, the last couple of years combined, we're at about 4,900 yards rushing yards allowed. The last 2 years combined. Been a rough couple seasons up in the Pacific Northwest in run defense. They did have their last sub 2,000 yard season allowed was in 2021, so it hasn't really been that long ago. But given the depth, like we've been talking all segment about the interior, the edges. I do have questions about linebacker, but that might be the weak link here. But secondary is making, the sun's appearing right as I'm talking about the defense. The sun's coming right through my window. It's just, I'm going to go under. I'm going to go under as the sun appears in my room for the first time all day, pretty much. I'm going to say under here. There's, the sign has spoken that the Seahawks are going to go under rushing yards allowed 2,000.
I'm in agreement with you because I just cannot see Mike Macdonald allowing that to happen. I just think schematically he is going to have his guys in position. They're going to be ready to play. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say this is a top 10 run defense. That would be an incredible prediction. But just to be 20 or 21 would be a heck of an improvement after what we've watched the last 2 years. And I just can't see Mike Macdonald allowing it to be that bad, especially with the investments that they've made on the defensive line. The linebackers are at least more athletic than what we've seen overall. So hopefully that transitions into getting more stops in the run game. So we'll see, but I think they're going to be under by a significant margin there. And our last one on defense, 16.5, the ranking for Seattle's scoring defense among all 32 NFL teams. Over or under, Nick?
Basically, above average or below average. I mean, 16 is right at average. I guess I could kind of go there. Kind of how we've been building up to all segment, Corbin. I think that this defense is bound for a bounce back. It's going to look much improved, not just from the coaching, from the personnel that they've done. Byron Murphy, first round pick, just all these things coming together. I could easily be talked into the Seahawks having a 15th, 14th, 13th ranked scoring defense. Now, again, like you mentioned, going in the top 10 might be a little steep, at least year one. Mike Macdonald has done some great things with defenses, and I could see the Seahawks team developing into one of the better defenses in the NFL. I'm not quite sure we're there yet, again, especially at linebacker, but I could easily see them being a top 15 scoring defense. I'm going to go under, below, better than 16.5.
I'm going to go under, but just barely. And maybe I'm being a little more of a pessimist. I think this defense is going to have some issues early in the season. I think there's going to be growing pains because you are bringing in a brand new coaching staff, a new scheme. You have a first-time head coach. So we'll see how he handles that adaptation. You do have Leslie Frazier there as a mentor for him that I think is going to help ease that process a little bit. But still, this is a new coaching staff with a lot of guys that either have not coached in the NFL or their first time coaching in the spot they are in Seattle. So I think there's going to be growing pains. I think by the end of the season, this is going to be a top 10 caliber defense. But I think the stats are going to bear out. They're going to be in that 17, 18 range. I think they're going to be very close to being above this. But I'm not going to push the envelope and say, oh, this is a top 12 defense. I just can't do it because I think there's going to be some growing pains for this team. When we come back, we're going to continue over under. We've been talking defense. Let's go to the fun side of the ball. Let's talk some offense. 2024 predictions for the Seahawks. We'll get to those coming up next here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by Yahoo Finance. You want to grow your portfolio to deal with the rising costs of inflation, pay off your debt, or your mortgage, pretty much anything standing in the way of you and financial freedom. With Yahoo Finance, you can get access to the news, data, and tools you need in order to help reach that financial freedom. Whether you're a seasoned investor or looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data you need in one place. They are the #1 finance destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. With a community of over 90 million users each month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com, the #1 financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com. You're listening to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, on Blue Friday by my co-host, Nick Lee. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have you gotten sick of turning down the volume with all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for your everyday sports needs. We bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As we draw closer to the 2024 season, it might feel like it's a long way away, but blink a few times and training camp is probably going to be here. This moves very fast. Year-round league, the NFL is. We'll be to training camp before you know it. So keeping that in mind, it's never too early to start predicting how things are going to play out in the 2024 season. We're playing over or under here on Blue Friday. We are going to have a scenario, a statistic with a variety of different offensive topics now. And Nick, you and I have to decide whether the Seahawks are going to go over or under that statistic. So let's get started on offense. Our first one here, 1.5 receivers with 1,000 plus receiving yards, over or under.
Well, the Seahawks have, I think, one of the better trios in the NFL, and I'm going to tell you why that could be a little bit of a wrench in things here. Last year was only DK. It's basically happened every other year for the past 3-4 seasons, 2020 and 2022. 21 and 23. That did not happen. DK, I think, should get there again. Lockett, I mean, he had a career low in yards after the catch last year. He's not, quite in this peak elite peak anymore. That's not to say he can't get his, because he's still one of the more I think Tyler Lockett's game will age pretty well. Like, I think he'll still be an effective receiver for several years. But my thing is, I wonder if Jackson Smith and Jigba will start digging into that a little bit, and maybe the tight ends, the passing game in general. Will there be, a focal point on the top two guys enough to get them to both 1,000 yards? Because you got JSN, you got the tight ends. Hopefully an improved running game will take away some of that, the sheer volume of passing. So it could be a good thing. I mean, would you rather have 2 1,000-yard receivers and JSN at 500 or 600, or would you have 1,000-yard receiver and JSN and maybe Lockett at 800, 850? I mean, that could be a better option. So I'm going to go under, but not because I don't think Lockett can't get there. I just think JSN is rising a bit and could take away some of that volume.
I'm going over, and you mentioned JSN. The reason I'm picking over is I think JSN gets to 1K for the first time in his career. This offense is beautiful for a player like Jackson Smith and Jigba. You saw what Jalen McMillan and Jalen Polk just did the last 2 years for Ryan Grubb. Very similar in the sense that they do a lot of damage from the slot, can create after the catch, have some sneaky ability to win downfield. I got to see that with JSN on Wednesday at the OTAs, catching a deep ball on a slot fade from Geno Smith. I just think year 2 is going to be the year of reckoning for JSN. And that's not to say Tyler Lockett can't still be really good himself, but I think that you might see a little bit of a passing of the torch this year, where it's DK Metcalf and JSN as the pecking order for Geno Smith throwing the football. And so I think those two guys, write it up, they're going to get 1,000 yards for the Seahawks this year. And I think you might have a really interesting tandem there moving forward. And maybe Tyler Lockett's going to have something to say about all this, but it's not a bad problem to have with 3 really good receivers. Our next one here, 1.5 quarterbacks with 2 or more starts. Our Sam Howell fans out there are probably wondering about this particular topic. Over or under?
Well, this is certainly one of the spicier ones, too. And, of course, we can't have a push here. That'd be kind of awkward. I'm going to go basically the question is, will Sam Howell start 2 or more games? Given that Drew Lock last year started 2 games, and I think Howell does too. I think that the coaching staff truly wants to see what they have in Sam Howell. I think they're going to pick a spot. Now, kind of like last year where, Geno Smith, could he have gone maybe a little banged up? Let's throw Sam Howell out there, just like they did with Drew Lock, against the Eagles, and he made another 2 starts there. And then you got to keep in mind, Pete Carroll was one of Geno Smith's biggest champions, biggest cheerleaders. He's not the one with the headset anymore. He's that loyalty to Geno Smith just goes down a little tick with this new coaching staff. I mean, I think they're still fairly high on Geno Smith. I mean, they've said so, but I'm going to go over. I think Sam Howell gets at least 2 starts. I think that the coaching staff, again, truly wants to see what they have, and they're going to pick a couple spots to get Howell. And also, there's no guarantee that Smith will stay healthy for all 17 games. That's really hard to do in this league. So, yeah, give me the over.
I'm going to go under just because, maybe I am thinking too optimistically about the offensive line. But really, this boils down to 2 men that aren't going to be in uniform, Ryan Grubb and Scott Huff. You look at Ryan Grubb's entire coaching history all the way back to Sioux Falls College. He has been an offensive line coach at heart, and everywhere he has gone, his offensive lines have improved immensely. And Scott Huff has been his tag team guy the last 2 years, a really good technical offensive line coach. So I'm going to go under just because I believe Geno Smith's going to stay healthy. I think the pass protection is, maybe it's not going to be great, but it's going to be better than it was last year, even if Abe Lucas isn't playing. George Fant is a much better insurance policy than what they had last year. So I think Geno is going to play. I think he's going to start. In fact, I'm going to make the prediction right now. He starts every single game this year. I think he's going to stay healthy, and the Seahawks are going to be competitive enough that there isn't going to be a reason to put another quarterback into the lineup. So I'm going to go under on that one. Speaking of that offensive line, over or under 12 sacks allowed by the starting tackles. And we're hoping it's Charles Cross and Abe Lucas.
Well, the last time it was Charles Cross and Abe Lucas, they combined for 16 allowed in their rookie years. And last year it went down a tick. If you combine, Jake Curhan and Stone Forsythe on the right side, they allowed 8 combined with Cross allowing 6 per Pro Football Focus. So that's 14. Yeah. I did geometry. I can do math and geometry. Only I got a C in geometry, but got B's everywhere else. So go from 16 to 14 last year. So going down to 12, I mean, natural improvement. I could see still an improvement from Charles Cross. 12 seems pretty solid when you think of 16 and 14 last couple of years. Like you mentioned, with the new coaching staff, I think that's going to be a big emphasis on protecting the quarterback. So I'm going to cheat. I'm going to say push. I'm going to say 12. Maybe I stole your thunder. I'm sorry, but I'm going to go push here. I do think, because otherwise I'm saying 11, which could be a little steep with, kind of the progression of things. But I do think this is going to be an improved pass protection, and 12 would display that.
I'm going to go under, but barely. I'm going to say 11. And the reason that I'm going under here is that even if Abe Lucas is not playing, I have enough confidence in George Fant that he can limit the sacks. And I want to give a shout out to Geno Smith. You watched the end of the season last year. Seattle actually only gave up 38 sacks as an offensive line. And the reason that mainly happened was because Geno Smith's escapability, his ability, the Steelers game, the Steelers could have had 10 sacks and only got a couple because he was like Houdini back there. And we used to use that reference with Russell Wilson. He doesn't do it in the same way, but his pocket presence has improved so much the last couple of years. So I'm going to go 11. I'm going to go under. I think the O-line is going to be average. I'm not going to sit here and say it's going to be great, but I especially think the pass protecting aspect, the coaching staff changes, and some of the insurance policy they brought in, this should be a better group protecting Geno Smith. Let's get to the run game, shall we? Over or under 1,800 rushing yards as a team.
So last year, a paltry 1,500 or so, 1,580. They did get over 2,000 yards in 2021 and 2022. So basically, we're asking if they're going to be something in between, the really good running games the last couple of years and then last year, which I think I can be talked into. Absolutely. Ryan Grubb has basically said they're going to accentuate the strengths of this team. So I'm not going to sit here and say he's going to go basketball on grass on us like they did sometimes at UW. But I don't think it's an accident, Corbin, that the two number one seeds from last year were in the top 3 in rushing. I mean, it's still a rushing league. I mean, even though we want to paint this, fun basketball on grass picture, but running the ball is still very important. I think this coaching staff truly will embrace that. I'm going to go over. I don't know if they get to 2,000 again, but I could easily see between 1,800 and 2,000 with an improved offensive line, hopefully an improved and healthier, running back room, and just a better scheming overall. So I'm going to go over.
I'm going to go over too. And I know a lot of fans are going to say, but look at what UW did. They threw the ball over the place. Look at the receivers. Seattle's going to be aggressive throwing the football. That's not going to change. But again, Ryan Grubb, you had to look at the entire history here. When he was the O-line coach at Eastern Michigan, they finished in the top 7 in the country in rushing yards one of those 3 seasons. And he was involved with their run game coordination. So he is capable of churning up, and they were really efficient with the run game. Now, sometimes it was not always great, but they didn't need it to be because the passing game was so good. But I like the fact he's had zone and gap-oriented running schemes, had success with both of them. So I think this is a team that I'm not going to go 2,000, maybe like 1,875, but I think this is going to be better than last year. And the O-line is certainly going to help with that too. They got some guys that I think Christian Haynes starts day one. I think Christian Haynes is a guy that can instantly improve your run game as a plug-and-play guy. Our last one, we already mentioned Geno Smith on here. Over or under 27 passing touchdowns for Geno Smith. He had 30 2 years ago and just 20 last season.
Well, I think we both maybe tipped our hands in a previous one here. So, of course, given the talent at receiver, this is very attainable. The Seahawks have all the talent. I think Ryan Grubb will work to accentuate the talents of Geno Smith in that offense. Yeah, going from 30 to 20 was a bummer last year. But going from 20 back to 27, that's a pretty good jump. And once again, I'm going to throw a little bit of a wrench in here. I do think that the coaching staff wants to see what Sam Howell has. And so they're going to pick a spot or two where he can get a couple starts. And that will obviously take chunks out of the pile of Geno Smith's passing touchdowns. I'm going to go under. I'm going to go on. Not saying he's going to have a terrible year. Not saying he's going to, tank 25, 24. That's still, not a crazy bad year, but I'm going to go under 27. Just with the caveat, I think that Sam Howell will get a couple looks.
I keep mentioning Ryan Grubb. I think that he is one of the most important additions the Seahawks have made this offseason. I love the system. I love the way that he gets his passing game set up for his quarterback to be able to distribute the ball to multiple receivers. I mean, Jack Westover had 40-plus catches for Washington last year as their fourth receiver, sometimes their fifth receiver. And so you consider all the different weapons the football got sprayed around. Geno Smith's already proven he can do that when the offense is catered that way. 2 years ago, I thought Shane Waldron did a lot better job of getting it set up where he could get the ball to a number of different playmakers. And then Jake Bobo's going into year 2. I think he's still going to be a guy that's going to get you some catches to go with the big 3 we talked about earlier. So I don't know if he gets to above 30, above what he did 2 years ago. But I'm going to say 29. I'm going to go real close to that. I have him starting every game. I think he gets to 29. I think the run game is going to be a little more effective. Maybe that takes away a few of those touchdown opportunities. But 29 is still a really nice number for him in his third year as a starter for the Seahawks. So I'm going to go over on that one. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Nick at NickLee51. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back on Monday, we're going to be taking a close look at that linebacker predicament. Where do things stand with the veterans right now not being able to practice in OTAs? And could Tyrese Knight be in the mix a little earlier maybe than some fans are expecting? We'll be diving into that on Monday's episode. Enjoy your weekend, and thanks for listening in. Go Hawks.